Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the final part of the series of the Internships 101, Making the Most of Your Internship. I'm Liz. I'm the Internship Programs Advisor, and I'm joined today by four students, Holly, Jayla, Melissa, and Renee, who've all had very different internships here to speak on their experiences. Today's panel is going to be moderated by Melissa. So Melissa, I will let you introduce yourself and kind of take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. It's really nice to meet everybody in this room. My name is Melissa Paslars. I'm a senior. I study psychology and I have a minor in management consulting. In terms of sort of my internship experience, and I'll be moderating today, but I've worked at EY Parthenon over the past few summers, working in private equity through education as well as social impact, that strategy space. I've also worked at Kaiser Permanente, so also the healthcare space. And most recently, I wrapped up an internship with USC Human Resources, and I am currently an intern at the Career Center. So there's a lot of experience there. I'm really excited to hear from all the panelists in the room. So if we could just kind of go ahead and introduce each other. If you could introduce yourself, maybe your major, and also what other internship experience you have, that would be great.
Hi everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Renee Torres. Um, Currently, I'm a senior studying public policy, and actually this semester I just started my progressive degree in public administration. So both degrees out of Price. Um, my hometown is Fontana, California, and a lot of my internship experience has actually been in like the public sector. It's really what I'm passionate about. I want to work in public service full time when I graduate, and so my experiences have been in both nonprofit and local government. I've been at a nonprofit that focuses on education policy, another nonprofit that does economic justice, small business support. And then my two local government experiences have been one being at the LA County Board of Supervisors office as an intern, and currently right now I'm at the LA Mayor's office as an intern. Nice to meet you all.
Awesome. Thanks, Renee. We can have Holly go next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Holly Anderson. I'm a senior studying industrial and systems engineering, and then I have a minor in business finance. I'm from Chicago, so all of my internships have also been in Chicago. After my freshman year, I worked at a company called Aldridge Electric, which is a construction management company. I actually got this internship through two of my uncles that work there, so got connected with the recruiter. The following summer, I worked at another construction management company called FH Passion. After that, I realized that construction management wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So I started heavily recruiting for consulting, and I interned at KPMG this past summer under their advisory practice. And I will also be working there after I graduate, which I'm really excited about. Yeah, and then I can pass it over to you, Jayla.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Holly. So my name is Jayla Eloy. I am a senior at the University of Southern California, and I'm studying business administration. I have a minor in culture, media, entertainment, and then my emphasis is in analytics. So in terms of hometown, I am from Atlanta, Georgia. So I've interned there, but I've interned in different cities as well. Post freshman year, I was at Emory University. Then after that, I did work at Deloitte as a risk and financial advisory intern. Then I did some internships while my entire junior year. And I worked at Fox Entertainment. I was an experience and design intern. I was also a production and programming intern. And then this past summer, I worked at HP, and that was in Houston, Texas. And I was a content and project management intern. And then now, currently at USC, I'm an employee recruitment intern. So I work closely with everyone at the USC Career Center. So that's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for introducing yourselves. There's a lot of great ranges of experiences here, so I'm excited to keep hearing more about that. But maybe as we move into, thinking about like being in your internship experiences, I want you all to like maybe think back to your first day of your internship, and maybe just in preparation, what did you do to get ready for that? At least for me, like being a social sciences major and then working in like a financial services or consulting company was a little daunting. So I think for me, I tried to brush up on like some technical skills like Excel as much as I could. And then I also tried to kind of network on LinkedIn, and I feel like that was nice to at least put a face to the name, like for myself and for the full-time staff as well. But yeah, maybe we can start with Jayla actually, and then just kind of like go backwards.
So, as I mentioned before, I've had internships in like a bunch of industries from tech to entertainment to the big four, accounting. So, for my most recent experience at HP, I think it was a lot of nerves for me because I was in a different city. I didn't know anyone. So preparing for travel and things, that was a lot of preparation. But for the job itself, because I was working in tech, I wanted to make sure that very similar to you, I was brushing up on my technical skills, but also being prepared with questions for my managers. That's something that I really hold on to. I'm very curious and making sure that I come off like that. So coming up with questions for my managers, making sure everything is clear, just being naturally curious in that way, and just brushing up on the history of the company was really insightful for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can go next. I'll talk about my internship at KPMG this past summer. So, something that was super awesome was I actually got to meet a lot of the other interns at a program they did in December. They called this Talent Sync. So, this was just a chance to meet other interns across all the different offices, but I definitely met a lot of other interns in Chicago, which was really nice. I had some familiar faces going in. I got a couple people's phone numbers that I could text. But in terms of what I actually did to prepare for the first day is a lot of like little things just to make myself feel comfortable. So, I laid out my outfit the day before. I was commuting from the suburbs. I live in the suburbs of Chicago, so I really planned out that commute, making sure that I was on time. I think on the first day of your internship, you really are trying to make a good first impression. So making sure that you're showing up, looking prepared, on time, and with everything that you need. I kind of made myself a checklist, just making sure that I wouldn't forget any of the little things to make sure that I was walking in comfortable and confident.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a huge key to success, just like making sure everything is planned out.
Definitely. And similar to Holly too, I feel like I really paid attention to the smaller details when it came to preparing for my internship. So I was gonna touch on too, similarly, picking out an outfit before planning my commute. All of my internship experience has actually been in LA. Um, and just making sure like I know my route ahead of time. I will look up the weather just to feel like as prepared as I can be, because it being more prepared, I feel like takes away some of that anxiety for me. Something else I you do before every internship is I notice who's in the email chains with me and like my hiring process. And even if I haven't been in a direct Zoom or like direct email communication, there's always people CC'd or just in the email. And so I don't start connecting right away. Like I'd like to meet them first, probably. But I have looked them up on LinkedIn before I walk in, see their experiences, like Jayla, but maybe a little bit more less formal. I don't know if I come in having prepared questions, but I come in having an idea of who it is I'm going to be working with, what they value, who they're connected to, what their work experience has been, and then I kind of just start forming and like gaining a little bit of confidence in knowing that I'm stepping into an org. Um, Having a little bit of knowledge into who I'll be working with. But yeah, just doing my due diligence really helps take away those like first day nerves for sure.
Definitely agree with everything that's been said, and hopefully some good insights for everybody in the audience. I think as like a sort of, okay, it's your first day, you're put on a team. I'm curious, how did you manage being one of the newest employees on a team and, what challenges did you face? At least for me, I'm sure other people in this room have also experienced imposter syndrome, like being a small fish in a big pond. At least in my perspective, I made sure that I scheduled like little intro calls or like coffee chats or connects with people on my team, even if they were like a lower ranking member or a higher ranking member, just to make sure I had like all of the exposure to everybody who's going to be working with me. But yeah, I'm curious. We can actually just start off with Holly and then yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually going to say a very similar thing. I think I also scheduled coffee chats with everyone on my team, and I think this really helped. I had like an intro call with my whole team, and like I got to introduce myself on there, but I didn't really get to talk one-on-one with everybody on my team. So I didn't really feel like I had a connection with them. So then I went ahead and set up one-on-one coffee chats with them. And this is when I really got to know a little bit more of like the personal side of everybody on my team and got to make a little bit more of a connection. And then I think through that, I was just that much more comfortable maybe speaking up in our meetings or reaching out to them for help. Another thing I would say that I did was I leaned really heavily on the associates on my team, especially because these are people that were only a year or two older than me. So I felt a little bit more comfortable reaching out to them, asking them questions that maybe I didn't want to ask my manager. And they were super helpful for me. They would always be willing to jump on a quick 5 minute call with me to explain something. So yeah, I would say definitely recommend just trying to make a personal connection because I mean, the people you're working with are awesome people, and you want to get to know them beyond a work level, but also on a personal level. And then just leaning on those people that maybe are a little bit lower level and have the capacity to help you a little bit more.
Awesome. Renee, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, so a little bit of a different experience than Holly and Melissa because I haven't really worked in private sector like bigger companies. I think the biggest team I've ever worked on is the one I'm in right now at the mayor's office. The city of LA has around 400 employees, but the shop, so the way it's like divided up in local government, at least for LA City, is the mayor has different shops. So I'm in the community engagement shop, but that team is like max, I think, 20 people. And that's including interns, supervisors, program leads. And so I didn't go in really like having connections or established relationships, but being a new person on those teams, whether it be at local government or at nonprofits where the teams got much smaller, um, I felt what helped the nerves was knowing that at one point, everyone, senior leadership down to interns, have been in my shoes before, like coming in as the new person. Um, I feel like most of the challenges I felt were honestly like remembering names, leaving a good impression on people. But yeah, making sure I was just like prepared again, finding people on LinkedIn. But yeah, being the newest employee on a smaller team doesn't feel as daunting. And I think especially because in public service, a lot of people like are maybe a bit more empathetic or a bit more like, oh, like they want to help me succeed. And I've been lucky to be at good places of work, so I didn't feel like super daunted by being new. I think I felt really supported and they wanted to help me, especially as an intern. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, Jayla, do you have anything else to add?
Yes, I feel like you guys really touched upon like a big portion of for me. But one thing that was unique at HP, for instance, though I was in office in Houston, my entire team was virtual. So there was kind of like a disconnect in the sense that I don't see them physically, but I can connect with them on like Teams and things of that sort. So to settle like the nerves of being like the newest person on the team, I think like Holly spoke about just connecting with those people. And I had to be very intentional because not only were they virtual, they were in different time zones. So people were in different parts of the country or out of country. So making sure that I was scheduling calls like my first week with everyone, making sure they know my name, I know their role and I know how I can help them in the future was very helpful. And in terms of challenges, I think the most challenging thing was being virtual while being physically there.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that. It can be hard to navigate people who, like, maybe your team members are in different locations, different time zones, and you can't fully establish that rapport with them. But yeah, I love that everybody, pitched in a different perspective. And I'm also curious if, how did your interactions feel with other interns, other colleagues? And then most importantly, how was your like relationship with your supervisor? Did you feel like, I know Renee, you mentioned that you felt super supported, which is really great. But maybe I'm curious if people felt disconnected from their managers or just didn't hear from them at all. In my experience, I made sure that I had like recurring like weekly calls or chats with my manager, which was really helpful because I knew she was very swamped. But and doing so, I prepared like a weekly like wins doc and areas of growth document, and I think that's a really helpful tip to at least maintain that thread of connection with your manager. Circling back to my question, would love to hear about how you navigated all of that. And yeah, we can start with anybody.
I can take this one first. I had an awesome relationship with my manager this summer. I think that's part of the reason why I loved working there so much. We just had a very open communication style, which is something that I definitely prefer in work. From the very first day, he wanted me to be giving him feedback as much as he was giving me feedback, which I really appreciated. He was constantly asking me what other things I wanted to do. If there was anything he could do to make my experience better and stuff like that. We also had weekly check-ins, just making sure I was understanding everything, if I needed help with anything or if I wanted to try something new, anything like that. But I think learning how to take feedback from your manager is definitely a good skill. I know sometimes it's hard, if they're criticizing work that you're doing or trying to give you tips on how to be a better employee, it's not always the easiest thing to hear, but I think you just have to keep in mind that they're trying to make you a better employee overall and are really just looking out for you. So yeah, I had an awesome relationship with my manager. Um, and then in terms of interacting with the other interns, I thought this was a super fun part of the job. So I didn't have any other interns on my specific team, but I got to sit next to the other interns in Chicago and hear a little bit about the projects that they were working on, which was just super cool because obviously my experience this summer was just a little snippet of the opportunities that I might have going forward. So it was super interesting to hear what the other interns were doing, and get a little bit of exposure into the other offerings that KPMG has.
I will say, actually, I loved hearing what Holly had to say, and it's really interesting just seeing the differences in like different sectors. I didn't have as many like structured check-ins with my bosses, and I guess I'm right now I'm talking more about my supervisor and then mayor experience. So in local government especially, and also a nonprofit too, it's pretty, at least in the offices I was in, it's very I don't want to say unstructured in a way. There was structure, but my bosses are very busy. They're both they are area representatives, and so they're often out in the fields, like going to events, staffing the mayor, staffing the supervisor, um, going to community meetings, being a voice for like the supervisor, the mayor's office in their community. And so I actually struggled a bit. I felt really connected with my supervisor, but I struggled with maintaining like feedback loops or consistent check-ins. I think a lot of the times because the people I worked under were extremely busy, it felt like at times I had to self-manage and make sure I was on top of tasks or being very proactive about projects I picked up. And so I that was a bit of a challenge for me. Aside from that, I felt very connected to my supervisors. Ultimately, I felt very supported, but I think there was an internal battle, a little bit of feeling like I kind of need to be self-sufficient because they're super busy. Like their schedules are I feel like 24/7. They even have to work on weekends because the mayor's doing events every day and on weekends and the supervisor. But when it came to other interns, similar to Jayla, actually, I didn't see them as often because not that we were working virtually, but especially for the county and the city, it's massive. And the interns are all placed in their different corresponding geographical areas. And so right now I'm an intern for CD3 and CD12 within the mayor's office. And so that's basically in the valley. And so I don't really interact with other interns that are maybe in like South LA or in Harbor, um, and by the harbor because we're all in pretty different places. That means we all go to different events. So yeah, balancing really different schedules, whether it be across interns or supervisors, was a challenge. But I just still tried to be myself, show um, interest across different supervisors and try to get involved in different things. But yeah, I definitely struggled to keep a formal like check-in process, manage like and receive feedback, honestly.
In terms of supervisors and managers, I feel like though it was all virtual, they were very supportive. We had constant check-ins. It was weekly for like my supervisor, but my direct manager that's under my supervisor, like there's kind of hierarchy. We would talk every day. So every day I would come to work and we would have a check-in time and we would talk about like life, we would talk about my task, how I can support the future, things of that sort. So I was really fortunate to have really good supervisors and managers that were really wanted to make sure that I was succeeding. In terms of like interns and colleagues, even though I was virtual and the only one on my team, um, there was a large cohort of interns at the HP Houston site. So there was like at least like 180 of us. And it was very active. So we would have a lot of events. We went to like an Astros game. We went to different like bowling activities. It would be like based on your group, but you would have a lot of chances to do that. And I would be able to connect with other teams that had more interns than was on my team, and we would go out to get lunch sometime or do things of that sort. And then they were also very kind and wanted to make sure that the people who don't live in Houston, like me, was very integrated in the environment in that way. So they would host things at different Airbnbs in terms of like where they lived, or we would hang out outside of work as well. And I can say that it's really good for like relationship building and growing your network in that way. Because even though that we're not all interning at the same time now, I just went to Houston like a couple months ago and I met up with some of the people that I interned with. So it's really close knit and it was really a good experience to connect with people that are like-minded in the same field as you.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing that. And I think, it goes to show that there's very different experiences when you are an intern. At least like I would add maybe one thing in terms of like interacting with other interns. If like let's say you're in a big city like San Francisco, New York, I know there's students that have created little groups that are kind of called like intern meetup groups. And I used those before and I was interning in San Francisco. And it's a nice way to meet some new people or bring an intern, another friend with you and expand your network in that way. Because I think for me, at least, sometimes we were also really busy, very swamped, and we couldn't hang out all the time. So it would make it a little lonely. But yeah, finding other avenues is also very helpful to expand your network in that way. Awesome. And even on that note of like networking, I am curious, I'm sure we're all LinkedIn warriors here. But what advice do you have for growing your network while you're in your internship? A piece of advice from me is actually like maintaining a little spreadsheet, which I'm sure maybe all of you have maintained. It's kind of like a little contact sheet just to make sure I'm staying in touch with people. And also, if you have some really good mentorships that you developed throughout your summer, it's always nice to send like a little email after the summer ends, not just saying thank you, but also saying maybe like what your future plans are going to be. And staying in touch is also just a nice way to keep building on that mentorship. But yeah, happy to maybe we can start off with Jayla.
So in terms of networking, I feel like I was very intentional in the way that I interacted with the other interns because I knew that even though we may not all end up at the same place, they would be a great person to speak to and just be in your network in that sense. So I remember the first day I was just like passing around my QR code, like, hey guys, let's all check in. And then that was a way to like break the ice. And from there, we were able to like have lunch together and speak about different things. And they would introduce me to their managers on their team. So not only was I connecting with interns, but I was also connecting with their bosses and who they're working for. So that was a good opportunity to just broaden my horizons and to see what's out there. In terms of like managers and stuff, I was also asking them questions about who they knew from the company that I should speak to in terms of like my interests and stuff. We would have check-ins about like what I want my career to look like and what I'm interested in. And they would be very intentional in connecting me with different people from different teams that weren't even in Houston or that worked in like Oregon or were in California. So that was a really good way. Just be able to be open to everyone and be very friendly and just saying hi. That really helps.
Yeah, I can piggyback off of that. I had a very, very similar experience. I think befriending the other interns has so many benefits. One, it's a familiar face when you come in the office, and like you said, they also are going to be able to introduce you to their managers, which is a really easy way to get to those higher level people. Another thing that I used, which many people have told me, is every time that you do network with someone, whether this is a formal coffee chat or maybe just sitting and having lunch with them, asking them to recommend two or three people that you should go and talk to. So, like Melissa, I had a whole spreadsheet of networking, and every time I had a coffee chat, I would write down two more names. I would find their emails, and then I would schedule a coffee chat with them. So it was kind of just a never-ending flow. I feel like I never ran out of people I wanted to talk to. And I think this is important for a lot of reasons. I think one, you get to explore a lot of the company. Like I said, during the summer, you're only going to see that little snippet. But if you're really trying to see if this is somewhere you want to work, you probably want to hear about all the different projects, about, what it looks like to be an associate versus a manager versus a director. And also whether or not you come back to the company. I mean, if you do come back to that company, you never know which team you're going to be placed on. You might be placed on a team with someone that you coffee chatted and, you know a little bit about them. It's a familiar face. Or if you don't go back to that company, you never know where life is going to lead you. You guys might both end up leaving that company and ending up somewhere else. I think your network can never be too big. So just, yeah, definitely keep reaching out. And every time you do reach out to someone, ask them for someone else because they know so many people in the company and are just most people are willing to help the interns make those connections.
Yeah.
And also, to add on to that, I think um, working in nonprofits and local government, there can be like downsides as well or and positives, especially when building your network. So What I'm saying is right now, this has been the largest like internship cohort I've been a part of, and there's five of us. Usually, last summer when I was at the supervisor's office, I was the only intern for that supervisor. And then at both my nonprofit internship experiences, I've been the only intern there. And so networking, maybe with folks that are in my similar shoes, has been pretty challenging. I think a lot of that happens at Price for me. Especially because in local government and nonprofit spaces, the internship cohorts is very small. I think especially because all of my experiences have been unpaid because yeah, I think that's an experience a lot of like folks at Price have too when they're working for local government or nonprofits. But something that Jayla and Holly talked about too was coffee chats, and I feel like that was really helpful to have with managers or supervisors even within the office. And so what I did when I got there was even across teams, I think in nonprofits and local government, I think the teams are a bit more isolated from each other, where everyone's doing really specific and unique work. So often there's not really collaboration as much. And so a lot of it had to be like, I sought out people, I had to ask my boss what they were doing on that side. And so through there, I was able to build relationships. What's also really special is because there's two sides to the coin basically because of how small these organizations are within. I feel like I was able to really form connections that have lasted way beyond my internship. Like next month, I'm gonna go to my previous managers. I had baby shower. Like for my previous boss, I have babysat her kids before, and so we've able to really, I think because of how small these groups are, I was really able to get to know people like on a deeper level, even like on a familial level. Um, and yeah, but maintain professional always, but it's challenging when I'm the only intern or one of five, and so a lot of my networking is done um with managers and supervisors. But yeah, through coffee chats, which are really helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I mean, Renee, it actually sounds like, you have that skill that you built with maintaining those like personal connections and relationships. And I think it's wonderful to hear that you've been able to keep those going. On that note, I'm sure that there was a lot of hard and soft skills that you built throughout all of your internships. Which one was the one that I think stuck with you the most? How did you build that one, and then how has that prepared you for the rest of your career? Um, I think to start for me, I would say maybe effective communication. A piece of feedback that I would get from my managers is honestly like, let's say I was in a client meeting or I was in a stand-up with like the highest ranking person in our project. I would contribute, and while I would make good contributions, I wouldn't always give the best amount of context. So I think that's something that I really tried to work on, and I try to also transfer that to anything else that's going on. Like even working at the Career Center, I like help answer questions, and I make sure that I try to intentionally provide at least as much context as I can. Same thing in my interviews. I'll be working full time at Cisco, a tech company, and I think what really helped them the most was understanding like the threads of my narratives of like my story and my why. But anyways, long-winded, but context and communication was really helpful for me. Actually, we can start with Renee. Curious to hear about what skill was the most that stuck with you.
Yeah, definitely. So the skill that has especially stuck with me, it's a pretty simple one, but being able to be flexible, I actually can be a bit of a type A personality. And going into local government, especially, I had to learn to adapt, if that makes sense. So a lot of the times I was getting like, and I still do get like maybe a text the day before, like the mayor's going to be at this event, like we need support. These are the details. And so a lot of these opportunities and experiences um, are at the like drop of a dime or of a hat, whatever metaphor that is, but just being able to also adapt beyond wanting to have structure and organization. I think I have in my personal life, but sometimes in my professional life, especially in local government, I think flexibility is a big one, and adaptability has been a soft skill I've really had to develop because at times I felt like I was really up against a wall, if that made sense, when I was wanting to be like, no, but this wasn't scheduled or planned. I had to also understand that this is what I signed up for. And ultimately, I really do end up enjoying the events. And that's just the way it goes in local government. Things happen very quickly and events pop up, things get canceled or moved. And so, yeah, that's been one of the biggest skills I've had to really work on, rely on, and it's been one that has really helped me move from the county to the city.
How about Jayla? Or yeah, so feel free to go ahead, Holly.
Sorry, I was gonna say, I think the biggest skill that I learned and was practicing actively during my internships was time and task management. I think there were many days when I had a lot on my plate. You know, my manager was telling me to do one thing, my associate on my team asked me to help her with something else. There were leftover intern trainings I hadn't completed. There was an email I wanted to send to this person to follow up with them, a coffee chat I was trying to schedule. And it's a little bit hard. You kind of get wrapped up and you don't really know what's you should prioritize first, what you should dedicate the most time to. Something I found that was helpful was just talking to my team about this. Another skill, like you said, I think is communication. So, you know, if my manager gave me a task to work on, I would upfront ask him like, okay, when do you want this done by? And like, can we check in on this? So say if, you know, it was Monday and he's like, I want this done by Friday. Let's check in on Wednesday. So then I had a much better idea. You know, I maybe didn't have to dedicate all my time to it on Monday. I could split it between Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And I think just creating a list, like a physical list, either like on paper or on your computer, whatever works for you, and just kind of typing everything out, making sure that you have all your deadlines in check, and then just kind of prioritizing from there. You know, maybe you could push the coffee chat to Friday instead of having to have that on Thursday or something like that. But I think just actively practicing time and task management is definitely something that I developed through my internship and will continue to use in my career. I've definitely used it this semester. I work at the Career Center this semester. I'm a second semester senior, so I have a lot of like social and personal events going on. I also managing all of my final classes and things like that. So I think it's definitely a skill that you'll use at any point in your life.
For me, I would say one of the biggest skills that I worked on was creating like an effective feedback channel. I feel like this is very important in understanding what you're doing good and what you're doing wrong. So I would make sure that in all the meetings that I had with my managers, I would ask questions in terms of how I can improve or how could this have been done better or things of that sort, just to make sure that I'm on track and being very transparent with them. I think they really valued this because they saw my growth throughout my internship and saw that um, the areas that I did have trouble with, I was able to communicate that with them, and they were effectively like putting me in contact with other people on the teams and making sure that I was hitting all the goals and making sure that all the milestones were getting hit. So being very effective and intentional with feedback was very important for me.
Yeah, these are some great insights. And thanks for, answering all these questions. These are very helpful. I'm also wondering, so let's say like you're tasked on an initiative or a project. How do you make your work show? At least for me, I think that being proactive was a really big piece, or having like my own drive to wanting to contribute or make new mini initiatives under like what we're working on have was really helpful in a lot of my experiences. But actually I'm curious from like a more like nonprofit or like, your experience in the mayor's office, Renee, how did that look like for you?
Definitely. I actually want to echo what you just said. I think being proactive especially helps my work show a lot of the times, especially because I am the only intern or one of few. Like, in a way, our work does show, I think, because there's so few of us. And so I don't feel like I'm competing with others to like, or I don't know if competition's a good word, or I guess I'm the only one given that task. And so ultimately it does show when I complete it and give it to my supervisors. But being proactive, I think, especially helps my work like transcend just doing it, if that makes sense. A lot of the times, especially in the nonprofit, local government space, a lot of processes aren't fully solidified or in place. And so I would make like transition documents after I did like a sheet for my supervisor. And I think especially because there's a lot of turnaround in local government, even across like my bosses. I know like my boss had just been there for 2 years, and there are other area representatives coming in that have just been there for 6 months. So if I could help as an intern kind of create and be proactive about transition documents or how-tos, and I created those, um, I think that really helped transcend just how I can make my work show. But yeah, definitely being proactive and a a good piece of advice I received and that I continue to do is to make sure I'm like doing something that's out of the box to just help solidify my boss's work too.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, feel free, Holly or Jayla, if you want to add anything.
I can go ahead. I think there was two things that I did this summer. So first of all, another intern actually recommended that I do this during the first week, and I was super grateful that he did this. But to actually make a list of all the tasks that I did throughout the summer, I think a lot of times as an intern, you might be doing a bunch of littler tasks, maybe not doing one big project or something like that. So it is kind of hard, throughout the summer, it's 9 weeks. You might not remember what you did 9 weeks ago, but all of these little things definitely do add up. And then, when you're having that meeting with your manager, or I had like a performance manager who was going to speak with the people at KPMG about return offers and things like that, actually having like a list of things to like present to them and be like, okay, here's what I've been doing the past 9 weeks. It just was definitely a way to keep things organized and make sure that you weren't forgetting anything. And then another thing I would say is, like you guys said, is being proactive and asking for more opportunities. There were a couple times this summer when I was on meetings, and my manager would bring up like, okay, somebody needs to work on this today. And I would jump in and be like, oh, I can try to do that. And my team, I mean, we were a pretty close team, but they'd be like, like respectfully, Holly, like it's going to take us way more time to teach you how to do that versus you being helpful on this. They're like, so we love that, but can you just focus on what you're doing? But I think just asking over and over, like, hey, can I help with that? Oh, can I sit in on this meeting? If you have the time for it, I think you'll definitely just gain more experience from doing that. And the worst case that sometimes they might say, no, you aren't ready to do that yet. But a lot of times the answer was yes. I got to sit in on meetings with the clients. I got to, practice taking notes for meetings, little tasks that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. So yeah, I would say be proactive and then just keep some sort of log of things that you did so you can actually present that when it comes time.
I honestly had similar experiences with both of you guys. My manager actually told me to do the same thing my first day to write down everything I did, and that was very helpful going forward. But also just showing effort and just showing curiosity, just on a similar note of being, effortful in the sense that I would, asked to do things that maybe weren't aligned with my job role, but just did it because I was willing to learn. And as an intern, you're there to learn. So that's kind of like the perspective that I had. I was also very proactive in the sense I'm a type A person, so I like to make sure everything is very organized. And I really showed up in my work because it made sure that I was on time all the time and make sure that all my projects were done before or on time. And it would give me a buffer almost to ask for feedback about what I was doing and if I was on the right path. And I feel like that really showed my effort and showed that I really cared about what I was doing and the solution or conclusion of it.
Sure, I love that. I think one phrase that comes to mind too that I would always say that during the summer would be like to be a sponge and absorb everything, like your mistakes or what you've learned, and that just kind of shows that you're showing up for yourself too. I think even on that note, like Holly was mentioning a little bit about return offers, and I kind of want to pivot that conversation a little bit. So at least in my experience, navigating that culture of return offers felt like a little bit of a black box to me. I wasn't explicitly told, what I would be measured on, what were the criteria. But what I did make sure to do was talk to the recruiter, that would still stay in contact with the interns. I'd check in with my manager and I'd say like, hey, what is the status? Like, what do I need to know, like how to perform well? I think for me, it was hard to just there was just a lot of stigma surrounding that. It felt like a very like mysterious thing for me, and I'm curious, how did that feel like for you? How did you navigate those conversations? Renee, I'm curious, I'm not sure if there's like sort of a return offer culture, at least, in the internships that you've done, but maybe you could speak to that first.
Yeah. I'm happy I'm going first because my answer is pretty short and sweet. I've actually not experienced that, and I don't think that's asked of us or talked a lot about, honestly. In a way, maybe it's more informal, like a return offer thing, but not really, honestly. It's more if there's an opportunity that opens up. I think that's why I stay connected with my managers. Then they'll reach out to me. Um, but yeah, nothing formally for return offers. I think especially because there's so few opportunities for new hires within the departments I've been working in. But yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
I could say in tech, it's very similar in the sense that the return offer is, like you said, a big part of like the experience. Like you're trying to perform well and you're checking in with your managers and things of that sort. Because it was going into my senior year, I had those conversations with my manager and I was very direct and I was like, oh, do you guys, because they do opportunities where you can like extend your internship into like your fall or like your spring semester. And I was asking that way, like, oh, can we extend or is there opportunity that way to like stay on the team? And I feel like my team was very transparent in saying that though that they can't do that, they will be in touch for things that are more full time and things of that sort. And it honestly depended on the team for different interns, and some of them got their full-time offers before even ending their internship. It's just a team by team basis. But I can say in tech that that culture is very, very cutthroat. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to Jayla and Melissa. I think it definitely was kind of at everyone's front of mind during the summer. I think it also definitely did get a little bit awkward or uncomfortable talking to the other interns about it just because we didn't really know if we were competing against each other. Like we didn't know if there was a certain amount of spots and like only a certain amount of us were going to get those spots. So I felt like it was kind of like we were all kind of like tiptoeing around it, but obviously we were all kind of constantly thinking about it. Um, I do know that it was both like performance based and also based on like the capacity that they had to give jobs out. But I think like you guys mentioned, I think it's just important to kind of be open about it and like have that constant communication with your manager or your recruiter and be like, okay, like, is there anything else I should be doing? It was nice for me because I had like two formal reviews with my manager, one at the middle of the summer and then one at the end. So it's kind of nice at the middle to kind of have that formal check-in point, see what I was doing. You know, he was able to give me feedback of things that I could improve on to heighten my chances of getting that return offer. But yeah, I definitely would say it is a little bit of an awkward, like an uncomfortable thing that everybody's constantly thinking about, but trying not to talk about. So if you have those feelings throughout your internship this summer, like it is normal. But one thing I will say is like as much as your company is going to be deciding if they want you, you should also be deciding if you want them. I remember someone telling me this summer that you should look at your internship as like a 3-month interview. So during an interview, obviously, there's the interviewer trying to ask you questions, see if you're a good fit for the team, see if they could imagine you working there. But also, you should be thinking like, oh, do I like the culture of this company? Do I like the projects that I would be working on and things like that. So it's kind of hard because you know that you're being somewhat critiqued and graded throughout the summer, but at the same time, make sure that you're also kind of grading the company and thinking about if that's somewhere that you would also want to accept full time.
I really like that sentiment of like kind of making sure that it works within your values and who you are as a person and the other way around. Definitely agree with that. And now for a final question. If there's any final advice that maybe you'd give to somebody who's just starting off on their path of internships, of their mosaic of internships, what would it be? I can, go ahead first. I would say, don't ever like be hard on yourself for not knowing something, like how it works during the experience. You're here to learn, you're here to grow. And also you're in that room for a reason. I think I felt so much imposter syndrome because I didn't know how to do like some sort of financial forecasting. And I just would beat myself up because I'm like, well, I don't have a lot of Excel experience. But you're here because, they're there for a reason. So that's probably my 2 cents. But yeah, maybe we can start off with Jayla.
I think my biggest advice would just to be open. I feel like sometimes people are just very boxed in by what their major is or what they think they want to do, but I think that's the beauty of an internship. You're able to, like Holly was talking about, interview them and see if that's the type of industry you want to be in and if that's the culture you want to be, if that's the location you want to be in. So it's really assessing all those different components because I can speak to myself in the terms of me being in different industries and holding on to what I do and what I don't like. And I'm translating that to what I'm going to be doing full time after. So being able to be open minded and be just willing to learn is probably the biggest advice I have for anyone who's starting the cycle or continuing.
Building off of Jayla's sentiment, especially, one of my biggest pieces of advice I have for someone who's especially interested in public service work, is learning by observation is just as important too. I think a lot of the times, um, tasks can sometimes be not as like tangible, honestly. A lot of the times you're going, at least personally, I was going to events, doing different things. A lot of it is very public facing work. So tabling, talking to constituents, phone calls, doing some phone banking. But one of the biggest opportunities for me to learn was just by learning by observation too, noticing what my bosses are doing, noticing how happy they are, noticing how many people are laughing, like by the water cooler, noticing if people can take a break if they need to, noticing just the smaller things, I think ultimately build up to have helped me realize if I wanted to truly be in this space or not. Noticing how people interact with folks that are not their colleagues has also been a big one in that space. Um, I think especially in public service, there are a lot of personalities because you have to be on a lot of the time and be an extroverted person, especially when talking, or there's a lot of public speaking opportunities. And so noticing the small things, learning by observation is just as important as working on a project, in my opinion. Yeah, just continue to do that and notice. I guess it builds off of what Jayla and Melissa said. Be open-minded. Also treat this, and Holly mentioned this too, as an interview experience for them too, reverse interview almost. But yeah, make sure that like you have your blinders off and really notice and be reflective. Yes.
Yeah, one thing I want to add, I agree with everything that you guys have said. One thing I want to add that I feel like we maybe haven't touched on, is to not be afraid to mess up. One thing that I really appreciated this summer is my team like constantly was telling me like it's okay if you don't do it right the first time, like we'll go over it and then you can try again. And they were like, internships are the time for you to try things and not be perfect at it. I think a lot of times people expect to walk into internships and they're like scared that they don't know how to do everything. I think Melissa, you touched on this. You know, you don't have to know how to do everything. Internships, you're there to learn and to grow and really just like see if this is something you want to do. So don't be afraid to try new things. Like I said, volunteer to, you know, maybe sit in on something or help someone do something that you have no experience with, or, you know, just try to give yourself as much exposure as possible to different things, even if you might not do it perfectly on the first time. Luckily, being an intern, at least in my case, people were always like looking over my work. Like what I was doing was never going to be the final thing turned in at the end of the day. So I think it's nice to just kind of have that opportunity to try new things and really just expand your opportunities.
Awesome. So well said, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. That kind of is that wraps the end of our formal questions, but we might have some Q&A questions, Liz, so I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, we don't have any Q&A questions. We did have a few, but I answered them in the chat. We did record this session. If you guys did want to look back at this, you can find it on our YouTube channel, which is linked in the Q&A for that question I answered. We'll also have some notes for today's session that will be posted on our website later on. But thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to Melissa, Holly, Jayla, and Renee for sharing your wisdom from your experiences and your internships. I think it was very valuable insights. I feel like I learned a lot from you all too. So thank you all for sharing, and thank you everyone for joining us. So hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.